UN officials concealed election fraud in Afghanistan to benefit President Hamid Karzai. And that's according to a high-ranking member of the organization who claims he's been fired for sending a strongly worded letter to the UN Secretary General. RT's Marina Portnaya brings us the details of a story that could seriously undermine the credibility of the UN mission in Afghanistan.
He wrote a letter to the United Nations Secretary General accusing his boss, saying that his boss, the top guy for the UN in Afghanistan, prevented UN officials from taking action during the election that would have helped prevent any fraud from taking place. He also accused the UN boss in Afghanistan of being biased towards Mr. Karzai. And this shines a big spotlight on Afghanistan, which, as I mentioned, remains very fragile, barely stable, and Mr. Galbraith subsequently did lose his job.
He got fired because he was having an argument with his boss. Now, how many people are willing to do that unless it's out of principle? And apparently he's accusing the head UN person in Afghanistan of slanting toward Karzai. In fact, he actually quotes in his letter this guy saying, well, I'm biased towards Karzai, and I told him that, and that sort of thing. The major point is investigation compromised, because that's also done by a UN body as well. So if they're biased towards Karzai, they're ultimately supervising the fraud investigation.
These new facts that have come out, or allegations, I should say, does not lend itself to the process speeding up anytime soon. If anything, it may slow it down, and it may only frustrate and add to the aggravations that already exist in Afghanistan.
The Obama administration continues to discuss sending additional troops to Afghanistan. The country's international election watchdog, the Electoral Complaints Commission, is expected to shortly begin an audit of suspicious ballots from the August 20th elections. Initial results gave the incumbent Afghan President Hamid Karzai nearly 55% of the vote, but allegations of widespread fraud have delayed the final results. Last month, the United Nations-backed commission ordered a recount of 10% of ballot boxes after finding, quote, clear and convincing evidence of fraud. But the UN's legitimacy in Afghanistan has taken a serious beating. Last week, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon fired the top American diplomat at the UN shortly after the New York Times published excerpts of a scathing letter from Galbraith to Ban Ki-moon. Galbraith accused his boss at the UN mission in Afghanistan, Norwegian diplomat Kai Eide, of helping cover up electoral fraud and being biased in favor of Hamid Karzai.
Sir Peter Galbraith in Bergen, Norway. He was the top U.S. diplomat at the UN in Afghanistan, number 2 in the mission there, just fired by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Anjali?
Ambassador Galbraith, in your piece for the Washington Post this Sunday, you write that your former boss, Kai Eide, ordered you not to pursue the issue of fraud. Can you explain exactly how he did this?
Well, Anjali, I covered that. I'd be happy to go over it again. First, in advance of the election, when I was trying to reduce the number of the ghost polling stations, he ordered me to stop doing that after the Afghan ministers complained about it, although, of course, they were working for President Karzai, who would turn out to be the beneficiary of the fraud. At another stage in the process, we had collected very substantial data on fraud and turnout. This was done by the UN staff at considerable personal risk. Afghanistan is a dangerous place to operate. And then we wanted to do what our mandate is, which is to support the Afghan institutions, turn this evidence over to the Election Complaints Commission. He ordered the mission not to turn over the evidence, to sit on it. And then when the Independent Election Commission, which was really a pro-Karzai body, decided to abandon its safeguards, he objected when I intervened with them to try to get them to keep the safeguards. His argument is that that the UN Security Council resolution says that the United Nations should support Afghan institutions in a Afghan-run election, and therefore we shouldn't intervene. But in fact, of course, the mandate is to support not just elections, but free, fair, and transparent elections, not a fraudulent one. And it's, in my view, absurd to say that the international community doesn't have an interest in how these elections are conducted. First, taxpayers from the wealthy countries, and particularly the United States, paid for these elections. They cost over $300 million. So if, I mean, there's an obvious interest. But second, and even more important, these elections were a critical part of the political process in Afghanistan. The hope was that they would bring greater stability. They have now brought much greater instability. They've been the biggest strategic triumph for the Taliban since 2001. And with 100,000 troops there, of course, the United States and its NATO allies had a huge interest in that these elections be done properly. And frankly, the United Nations mission failed to do its job.
Via, 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 via.